Good evening, everyone. Welcome in. I'm Therese Bacon, Financial Education Specialist and lead of the Seminar Series program. So glad that you could all join us this evening. These sessions are designed to provide practical, relatable financial education that helps you feel more confident in navigating your money. We have a wide range of presentations planned throughout the year, and you can explore upcoming topics and register by visiting msufcu.org/events. Today's event is also being recorded, and you'll be able to rewatch or share it by visiting youtube.com/msufcu and then selecting the seminar series from those playlist options. So whether you're looking to improve your credit score, recover from past financial challenges, or simply better understand how credit works, you're in the right place. One of the most important things to remember is that there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to repairing credit. Everyone's financial situation is a little different, and that's okay. So tonight we'll discuss some of the most effective steps that you can take, explore different options and resources that may be available to you, and help you identify a path that makes sense for your own circumstances. So here's a quick look at what we'll be covering tonight. So we'll start with a credit overview. So we'll discuss what makes up your credit profile, some of the common factors that can negatively impact your credit score. Next, we'll move into steps to get started with the credit repair process. These are practical actions that you can begin taking regardless of where you are in your financial journey. From there, we'll explore options for resolution. Because like I said, everyone's financial situation is different. We'll discuss several different approaches and resources that may help depending on your individual circumstances. And finally, we'll wrap up with some key takeaways to reinforce the most important points and leave you with a few actionable next steps. So my hope is that by the end of tonight's session, you'll have a better understanding of how credit works, what can be done to improve it, and feel more confident about taking the next step towards your financial goals. So with that, let's go ahead and begin. So before we talk about repairing credit, let's make sure we all have the same foundation by talking about what credit actually is. Simply put, credit is an agreement between a borrower and a lender. A lender provides money or something of value with the expectation that it will be repaid over time, typically with interest. And every time you use credit responsibly, you're building a history of how you manage borrowed money. So that history is documented in your credit report, and then that information in that report is used to calculate your credit score. Okay, so think of it this way. Your credit report is like your report card, right? It contains the detailed information about your credit accounts, payment history, balances, other activity, and then your credit score is the grade that's calculated using the information in that report. So that's why these two do go hand in hand. As the information in your credit report changes over time, your credit score can change as well. It's also important to note what's not included in your credit report. So factors like your race, religion, gender, marital status, income, those are all not part of the credit report and are not used to calculate your credit score. So instead, your score is based on how you've actually managed credit over time. And understanding the difference between your credit report and your credit score is that first step toward understanding how to improve both. So now let's look at the key factors that influence your credit score. Different scoring models may weigh these a little bit differently, but these are the main areas that lenders consider. The biggest factor is by far payment history. So this reflects whether you've made your payments on time. Consistently paying your bills as agreed is one of those best things you can do for your credit, while missed or late payments can have a significant negative impact. The next factor is the depth and type of credit. So this is sometimes referred to as your credit mix. So this looks at the variety of accounts that you have, such as credit cards, auto loans, mortgages, or student loans, as well as how long you've been using credit. So that longer, well-managed credit history generally is going to work in your favor. And the remaining factors all relate to how you're currently using credit. So credit utilization refers to how much of your available revolving credit you're using, right? So those lines of credit. So for example, if you have a credit card with $1,000 limit and you're currently carrying a $300 balance, then your utilization would be 30%. And generally, keeping your utilization below about 30% is very ideal. If it kind of inches up over that 30%, that's when we start to see the credit score being more negatively impacted. Also, a recent credit looks at how often you've applied for new credit. Okay, so opening several new accounts or submitting multiple applications in a short period of time may suggest that you are a little bit more of a liability or a risk to lenders. And finally, balances and available credit kind of work together with that credit utilization. So the higher balances relative to your available credit can lower your score, while maintaining available credit and keeping balances manageable can have that positive impact on your score. So the important takeaway is that while you can't change your credit overnight, you can improve these factors over time by building those consistent financial habits. All right, so now that we've covered the basics of credit, what impacts your score, let's shift our focus to what you can actually do to begin repairing your credit. So it's important to remember that credit repair isn't about finding a quick fix. It doesn't really work like that. It's about taking those intentional, informed steps that can improve your financial health over time. So we'll walk through 4 key steps here. The first is to educate yourself, what you're doing tonight, right? Understanding how credit works, what affects your score, what your rights are as a consumer. All those things are going to help you make a more informed decision, throughout your financial journey. Next, you'll want to review your credit report. So before you can fix a problem, right, you need to know exactly what's on the report. So we'll discuss how to access your report and what to look for there. And then comes doing the math. So this means taking an honest look at your income, expenses, debts, your budget overall to kind of determine what you can realistically afford to pay toward improving your financial situation. And finally, it's time to make the call, right? So whether you're reaching out to a lender, a collection agency, or a nonprofit credit counseling organization, like we'll talk about towards the end, communication is often that first step towards finding a good solution. Many creditors are willing to actually, work with you, discuss payment arrangements or other options that they may be able to offer when you take that proactive step of reaching out first. So yes, every situation is unique, but these 4 steps provide that solid starting point for anyone that's looking to improve their credit. All right, so now let's look at some of the most common issues that can bring down a credit score. Understanding these can help you kind of identify where to focus your efforts next. So first are credit cards, specifically, the high balances or maxed out cards, because credit utilization is so important, like we talked about, and such a big part of your credit score. Carrying those high revolving balances can have a significant negative impact. Even if you're making your payments on time, using a large percentage of your available credit can lower your score overall. Next are late payments. So payment history is that single biggest factor in your credit score. Missing a payment can have a really lasting effect on your score. The impact often depends, on the type of loan or how late the payment is, but best approach is to make at least the minimum payment on time, whenever you possibly can. Another factor is derogatory items. So these include things like collections, charge-offs, repossessions, foreclosures, bankruptcies. These are considered serious negative marks and can remain on your credit report for 7 to 10 years, depending on the type of the item. Because they're part of your payment history, they also, in turn can significantly affect your score. And finally, there's inaccurate information. So not everything on a credit report is necessarily correct. Mistakes can happen, whether it's a reporting error or, they mixed up a name or address, some identifiable information, or even, identity theft in a really bad situation. Really important that you make sure that everything that's reporting on there is accurate. So really important reason to, review your credit report regularly. If you find information that doesn't belong to you or isn't accurate, you have the right to dispute that. So the good news is that while some of these issues can take time to improve, many are within your control, right? Paying down those balances, making payments on time, and correcting errors that you find, those can all help move your credit in the right direction. And as you begin working to improve your credit, It's also helpful to take a step back and recognize your overall money habits. Many people fall into predictable, financial cycles in life. So understanding where you are can help you identify opportunities for a possible change. So let's talk about these. The first cycle is earn, spend, borrow, spend. So in this pattern, income is spent as it's earned. And when the money runs out, then credit is used to continue spending, right? So this often leads to increased debt, can make it really difficult to get ahead financially. Second cycle is earn, spend, earn, spend. So here you're able to cover your expenses with your income, but each paycheck is used up before the next one arrives. While you're not relying on credit as much with this one, there isn't much room to actually build a real savings or prepare for, an unexpected expense that might arise. All right, so that's earn, spend, earn, spend. Then we have the third cycle, earn, spend, save. So this is a positive step because you're consistently setting aside money after meeting your regular expenses. Okay, so building that savings up, creating that little financial cushion can really help reduce the need to rely on credit when that unexpected, emergency expense comes up. And the final cycle is earn, save, spend. So this is often the healthiest long-term approach. By paying yourself first and saving before spending, you're making your financial goals a priority. So whether you're building an emergency fund, saving for a major purchase, or investing for your future, this habit is really going to strengthen your overall financial well-being. And really with all of this, the goal isn't, perfection overnight here. It's just recognizing your current pattern and kind of looking for those small, realistic changes that you can make to move toward that healthier financial cycle. And as your financial habits improve, it's often going to become easier to stay on top of that debt, right? Make those payments on time and really just overall strengthen your credit and your credit score. Okay, so one of the most important steps here in repairing your credit is reviewing your credit report regularly. So before you can create that plan of how you're going to tackle this, you kind of need to understand exactly what's being reported, right? You can obtain a free copy of your credit report from each of the 3 major credit reporting agencies, Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion through annualcreditreport.com, which is the federally authorized website for accessing your reports. You can check these as often as each week with each bureau. So you can definitely stay on top of it there. And as you review your reports, don't focus only on your credit score. Take time to carefully actually review all of those details for accuracy. So you'll start by verifying your personal information, including, your name, current and previous addresses and employers. And those small mistakes may not affect your score, but they can sometimes indicate that information has been mixed up with somebody else's file. So it's important to pay attention to those. Next, review the credit accounts that are listed, right? Make sure every account belongs to you, that the balances look reasonably where they should be, and that the payment history is actually accurate. And finally, look at your recent inquiries, like credit inquiries. Those would be, applications that have actually been submitted with your social security number. It will show up as that hard inquiry. So if you do see any of those, for a credit card or loan that you didn't apply for, that could be a sign of identity theft or some sort of unauthorized activity, which definitely needs to be addressed sooner than later. And yes, like reports do happen, these credit reporting agencies, there probably is somebody pressing that, enter button to send that information to your report. So mistakes can happen. They aren't perfect, right? So just identifying any of those errors often is that first step towards correcting it. So sooner you catch that inaccurate information, the sooner you can begin to dispute, anything and start that process if needed. So earlier we talked about this a bit about derogatory items as one of those factors that can really lower your credit score. So let's take a closer look at what those are and how long they typically remain on your credit report. In general, most derogatory information remains on your credit report for 7 years from the date of the last activity. So that can include items like collections, charge-offs, settlements, foreclosures, things like that. Bankruptcies follow slightly different timelines. A Chapter 13 bankruptcy typically remains on your credit report for 7 years, while a Chapter 7 bankruptcy may remain for up to 10 years. So just because those items stay on your credit report doesn't necessarily mean that they're affecting your credit score the same, with the same weight for that entire reporting period. As they age and you continue to build positive credit history, the impact of those derogatory items generally becomes a little less significant over time. So a few other things to keep in mind here. Collections, charge-offs, settlements generally follow that same 7-year reporting period. If you're working with a creditor or collection agency, be sure that you understand the terms of any agreement, before setting up those payment arrangements. And depending on the situation, new payment activity can affect how the debt is reported. So it's always a good idea to ask questions and get any agreement in writing before moving forward. If debts remain unpaid, they may eventually lead to legal action, such as a judgment, which can create additional financial challenges. And finally, if you're working through the repayment process, keep copies of everything, including, any payment confirmations, settlement agreements, any written communication with the creditors or collection agencies. That good record keeping can definitely save you a lot of frustration, if questions do come up later. And as you review your report, don't just look at the accounts listed, really take inventory of how you're doing in each of the major factors that, influence your score, like we discussed before. This can help you kind of identify where you're doing well, right? And where you have the greatest opportunity for improvement. So start with payment history. Ask yourself, am I consistently, making my payments on time? Since we know that payment history has the biggest impact on your credit score, bringing any past due accounts current and then staying current moving forward should definitely be a top priority. Next, look at your available credit balances, that credit utilization. Review how much credit you have available compared to how much you're actually using. If your credit card balances are high, paying those down, getting that utilization under control can often be one of the quickest ways to improve your actual credit score over time. Then consider your recent, credit activity. Have you opened several new accounts or applied for multiple loans or credit cards recently? If so, it may be beneficial to pause on new credit applications while you're focusing on strengthening your existing credit profile, because the more of those inquiries that you do have, it can, slowly tick away at your credit score. And then finally, think about the depth and type of credit you have. Do you have a long history of responsibly, managing your payments? Do you have a healthy mix of different types of loans and accounts? This isn't something you should try to change overnight if you do notice that you need to pay attention to this topic, but it's helpful to understand how it contributes to your overall credit picture. So the goal of your credit review isn't to, be discouraged by where you are today, but we really want you to identify which areas deserve the most attention right now so that you can create a plan that focuses on those changes that are likely going to have the greatest impact to your score. And once you've reviewed your credit report, the next step is creating an actual plan. All right. So this is where I like to say it's time to do the math. So rather than trying to tackle everything at once, you want to take a more strategic approach and ask yourself a few key questions. So first, which debts have the highest interest rates? That high interest debt, such as, many credit cards these days, can become more expensive the longer it goes unpaid, carrying that debt month to month to month. So understanding where you're paying the most in interest can help you decide where to actually focus your efforts. Next, ask yourself which items are the most severe. So for example, accounts that are currently past due or in collections may require more immediate attention than an older late payment that's already several, years old. Then consider what options are available to you. Depending on your situation, you may be able to negotiate a payment plan, settle or have a debt settlement with a certain lender. Maybe you can refinance, at a lower rate, or maybe you can do a debt consolidation loan, or even working with, a nonprofit credit counseling agency. that we'll talk about in a few slides here. But knowing your options can help you choose the approach that best fits your budget, your goals, and your plans. And finally, think about how long each item is actually going to remain on your credit report. So yes, you shouldn't ignore the older debts, but understanding the reporting timeline can help you prioritize your efforts and kind of set those more realistic expectations for that credit repair journey. All right, so now let's talk about some options for resolving debt on your own. So depending on your situation, you may be able to address credit issues directly without working through a third party. The first option is to dispute inaccurate information. You know, if you find those errors on your credit report, maybe an account that doesn't belong to you, an incorrect balance, you know, a payment that was reported inaccurately, you have the right to dispute that information with the credit reporting agency directly. If the information can't be verified, then they must correct that, you know, or remove whatever was reporting. Another option is to contact your creditor to discuss a payment plan. If you're, you know, having trouble making payments, don't wait until the account becomes severely delinquent. Many creditors are willing to work with borrowers offering, you know, modified payment arrangements, or maybe there's a temporary hardship option, something like that. But reaching out early often gives you more flexibility than waiting until the situation worsens. And finally, you may consider settling a debt. In some cases, a creditor or collection agency may agree to accept less than the full amount owed as payment in full. And this can help resolve that outstanding debt. But it's important to understand the potential impact. A settled account may still appear on your credit report, and there can be tax implications if a portion of the debt is forgiven. So you'll definitely want to get all of those details if you think that could impact you. But also, before agreeing to any settlement, ask for the terms in writing. Make sure that you understand how the account will be reported to the credit bureaus once it gets on that resolution process. But no matter which option you're considering here, communication is the key with all of these, right? Ignoring a debt is not going to make it go away, but reaching out to discuss your options can really often lead to a much better outcome. And another strategy here that can help improve your credit is using existing credit accounts to build, you know, a stronger payment history. So if you already have a credit card, you know, consider placing one recurring monthly bill, such as a streaming service or your phone bill subscription of some sort, on that card. Then simply wait for the statement to generate, pay that balance in full by the due date each month. So, you know, this approach can work well. Because it creates three positive outcomes all at the same time, right? So first, it helps establish that consistent payment history, which, as we've discussed, that single most important factor on your credit in your credit score. And then second, by paying the balance in full each month, you keep the amount owed much lower, right? You're paying that off each month. So that helps to maintain, you know, the healthy credit utilization ratio, like we talked about, while also avoiding paying interest if you're paying off your full statement balance each month. And finally, repeating this process month after month after month is going to build that positive history of the responsible credit card use over time. All right. And then for some people, rebuilding credit isn't just about resolving older debts, right? Maybe you're just trying to get that credit score up. Don't have a lot of experience with credit, something like that. So a couple ways to help establish new positive credit history. The two common ways are by using a cosigner or becoming an authorized user on someone else's account. So those sound kind of similar, but they're actually pretty different here. So a cosigner is someone who agrees to share the legal responsibility for a loan or a credit account. So if the primary borrower is unable to make payments, the cosigner is equally responsible for repaying that debt. Because of that, co-signing is a significant financial commitment and should only be done after careful consideration and very open communication with the person that would be the joint borrower there. And then authorized user, on the other hand here, is someone who is added to another person's credit card account. The account's payment history will appear on that authorized user's credit report, which means, you know, responsible use of that account can help establish or strengthen the authorized user's credit history. But it's also important to remember that this works both ways. So not only the positive things are reporting when you're an authorized user, if the primary account holder consistently pays on time, that can have a positive impact. But if they miss payments or if they're carrying high balances, then those negative behaviors are also going to affect the authorized user's credit. So just a couple things to consider there. So, whether you're considering, becoming an authorized user or asking someone to maybe co-sign on a loan to help you get credit established, make sure everyone involved really understands the responsibilities before really moving forward with this. These options can be, really valuable tools for building credit, but they do require a lot of trust and responsibility when it comes to those financial habits. And if you're ready to start paying down debt, there's two popular strategies that can help you stay organized and motivated during this process. The snowball method and the avalanche method. So the snowball method focuses on paying off your smallest balance first. So you continue making the minimum payments on all of your other debts, but you put any extra money towards the smallest debt. And then once that debt is paid off, you take the payment you were making and roll it into the next smallest debt, creating that snowball effect for payoff. Biggest advantage of this method is just that, psychological boost that it kind of gives you. Paying off an account quickly gives you a sense of accomplishment and can help you stay motivated as you're continuing through this process and working through your remaining debt. And then the avalanche method works a little differently. So instead of focusing on the smallest balance, you put your extra money toward the debt with the highest interest rate while you continuing to make those minimum payments on everything else. And then once that debt is paid off with the highest interest rate, then you roll that payment into the debt with the next highest interest rate. So this method often saves you the most money over time because you're paying less in interest, although it may take longer to see your first account completely paid off. So it just kind of depends on what's going to motivate you there. So either one of these methods, neither one is right or wrong, but the best strategy is going to be the one that you're actually going to stick with consistently. So, if paying off a few smaller debts keeps you motivated, that snowball method may be a great fit. If your goal is to minimize, the amount of interest you're paying over time, then maybe the avalanche method would make more sense for you. But no matter which approach you choose, the key is to have a plan, right? So list all your debts, determine which strategy works best for your situation, continue making at least the minimum payment on every account, and then focus any extra money on one debt at a time. That consistency is what ultimately is going to lead you to that progress. And then sometimes, despite your best efforts, managing debt on your own can feel overwhelming. So if that's the case, know that you don't have to do it alone. There is a really awesome nonprofit credit counseling organization, GreenPath Financial Wellness, that can be a really valuable resource in these situations. GreenPath is a longtime partner of MSU-FCU. They work with individuals to review your overall financial situation, really understand debt, and create a more personalized plan for you moving forward. Their counselors can help you build a budget, a very detailed budget, explore different repayment options, maybe even determine if a debt management plan is appropriate for your situation, and they would manage that. So, if you are feeling a little overwhelmed with the process, you can always give them a call and do that free consult just to see what options they may have for you. But one important thing here to know is that GreenPath is a nonprofit organization. Their goal isn't to sell you a product or encourage you to take on more debt, right? Instead, they focus on that education part and helping you find solutions that are, best going to fit your financial circumstances. And reaching out for help isn't a sign of failure by any means. In fact, it can be one of the smartest financial decisions that you make, right? Reaching out for that little bit of help. The earlier you ask for assistance, the more options you're likely to have available to you. So whether you work with GreenPath or another reputable nonprofit, counseling agency, just don't be afraid to make that first call. It could be that first step towards reducing stress and getting your finances back on track. All right, so a couple final tips to remember here. First, make your payments on time whenever possible. So we talked about this throughout the presentation because payment history is the single biggest factor affecting your credit score. Even if you can only make the minimum payments, staying current is one of the best things you can do for your credit. Second, don't be discouraged by setbacks. Credit repair is a process, it's not an overnight fix by any means. So if you've experienced financial challenges, just know that you are not alone. Many people have successfully rebuilt their credit by taking those small, consistent steps over time. Third, keep good records. If you're disputing information on your credit report, if you're setting up payment plans or negotiating with different creditors, save copies of any of those letters, emails, payment confirmations, any agreements that you receive. Having that documentation can make resolving issues down the road much easier, if any questions do arise. And then finally, continue monitoring your credit report. Credit repair doesn't end once you pay off a debt, right? Reviewing your credit report regularly is going to help you track your progress over time. It's going to help you confirm that information is being reported accurately, and you can also catch any errors or signs of fraud much earlier. So the biggest takeaway I'd like you to remember is that improving your credit is about building healthy financial habits over time. Every on-time payment, every dollar you pay toward debt, and every informed financial decision is a step in the right direction. And progress may not happen overnight, but it's that consistency that really will pay off in the end. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. As we close out, there will be a short survey that pops up as you exit this evening. And I'm just going to pull up the Q&A in case there was any questions. I'll hang out here for a little bit, but if anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to take those now. I'm just going to go ahead and stop recording, and then we'll go ahead and get to the questions.